group representing Muslim and Arab American voters says they're not happy about the Biden administration failing to formally call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Now a new push to, quote, abandon Biden is gaining steam. Leaders from several key swing states gathered in Michigan over the weekend to make their voices heard. NewsNation's Leland Vittert spoke to the publisher of the Arab American News about the campaign.
Who are they going to vote for?
Well, we don't know who the Republican nominee will be, since the choices are very limited in here. However, there is a third option, which is no vote for the top ticket. And not voting for the two of them, you know, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden, I think that gives them something to think about for the future.
There are about 3.5 million Americans who identify as Muslim, according to the Pew Research Center. That group broke nearly 2-to-1 for President Biden in the 2020 election. Let's continue the conversation right now with our friend from the Hill, White House columnist Niall Stanage. Good morning to you, Niall. Thanks for joining us from New York.
Good to be with you, Adrienne.
So how much does this matter? I mean, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, some statistics say make up about 1% of American voters. Is this a make or break group?
Not nationally, but of course elections aren't won or lost nationally. They're won in the Electoral College. And the real strength of Muslim American voters in this sense is in the state of Michigan, where there are around 250,000 Muslims and where President Biden won last time round by 150,000 votes, approximately. So they could be a pivotal group. They are, just as we see with other groups in other states. You know, Cuban Americans are not a big group nationally, but they're crucially important in Florida. So it's a scenario like that.
Is there a difference between Arab American voters saying we will just abandon Biden and remain silent, not going to the ballot box at all, or choosing a different candidate who has no chance of winning the primary?
In terms of the overall outcome of the election, Adrienne, it doesn't really matter. What matters is whether or not those voters vote for President Biden or not. Whether they vote for, say, Cornel West, for example, who's very sympathetic to the Palestinians, or Jill Stein from the Green Party, who has a similar view, those are votes that are taken away from the Biden column, as they would be if those voters simply stay home. So either way, it deprives President Biden potentially of crucial votes.
In terms of the landmark communities here, Detroit, Michigan, the largest concentration of Arab Americans in the U.S. We've seen a lot of people from there speaking out. We've seen demonstrations not only here in the U.S. but all around the world, but particularly here. The optics matter. How much does this cause, and how Arab Americans, particularly those we're hearing from, feeling disenfranchised, feeling like no one's listening to them, how much does that affect other voters and whether they will choose President Biden at the polls?
The key thing there, I think, Adrienne, is just the fact that the Democratic Party is really split down the middle on this particular topic of Israel and the Palestinians. We have seen over the past decade young Democrats in particular become much more sympathetic to the Palestinians. So when we have a group like the one that you're just referencing coming from within the Arab American community, I think that further empowers or energizes those younger left-wing, predominantly left-wing voters to take a similar view and to perhaps withhold their support from President Biden on the basis of his policy here. That can be a really serious issue, especially when we would expect next year's election to be close.
And there are a lot of voters, particularly those who are more conservative and Republicans, who feel like President Biden is being a bit wishy-washy, kowtowing to this community or kowtowing to those who might, question some of the things he says. Let's bring up this tweet, the White House clarifying this from the president and making reference to that ceasefire again. This is what it reads. Hamas unleashed a terrorist attack because they fear nothing more than Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in peace. To continue down the path of terror, violence, killing, and war is to give Hamas what they seek. We can't do that. The White House later said that this was part of a larger speech, not a change in policy in regards to whether or not a ceasefire was something that the White House wanted. What do you make of this?
First of all, you know, you can argue a lot about what that tweet actually means, and that's never a good thing in politics when it's just confusing what the politician, in this case the president, is getting at. What it's really about is the point that you raised in your question, Adrienne. He is trying to somehow satisfy both those Democrats who are more sympathetic to the Palestinians and a broader community and independent voters who tend to be much more sympathetic to Israel.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.